Om Ganatimirandasyanganangana Sarakya Chaksurun Miritam Yanatashmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yanabhutare Swayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Larita Shiveshakan Vitam Shtam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinu Bandhu Jagapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhikanta Namostute Jayatam Surito Pango Mama Manir Madir Gati Matsavasha Parambo Jarada Ramadanamonam Sriman Rasarasaram Vivam Sivaran Karsan Venushanur Paku Gopanata Sriyasanam Divyadrandananyakapadrumada Srimad Ratnagara Shima Shanishto Sri Sri Radha Shri Govinda Prasadabi Seva Manushmanami Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmani Taya Chajikari Taya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namah Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Guru Rajajam Mangalam Paridikaksham Mangaraya Tanohari Om Narayanaya Vidmahi Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tano Vishnu Pachodhyate Om Mahadevi Vidmahi Vishnu Pandichidhimahi Tano Lakshmi Pachodhyate Mahalakshmi Namastubhyam Namastubhyam Sare Sare Hari Priya Namastubhyam Namastubhyam Saptikanjana Goringe Radhavindavaneshwari Vishavanasite Devi Pranamani Hari Priya Namah Vishnu Paraya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Shami Tanam Namiste Sarasati Devi Guru Anivachani Nivashes Sanivari Praskita Deyasana Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Hare Hare. Good morning, Rob. On Zoom with me here. And Natasha, Jean, coming to us on Facebook Live, and a bunch of other people who haven't wished me a good Hare Krishna morning on the comments section. We're on Wisdom Wednesday today, revisiting for the 6th consecutive time the famous Atmaramas verse, which is in the 7th chapter of the 1st canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, going as follows: Atmaramas Tamunaya Nigranti Api Kuru Korvanti Api Itam Bhuta Ganahare. All different varieties of Atmaramas, which means those who take pleasure in the self. Atma means the self, the spiritual self, and Rama means spiritual pleasure. So Atmaramas are those who derive pleasure from the inner self and not from the arrangement of external circumstances and the interaction of the senses with the objects of sense gratification. They're self-realized. They've excavated, you might say, the well of Ananda, the well of pleasure, which is embedded within each and every one of us. And so those Atmaramas, well along the path of self-realization, although Nigranti Api Kuruvante, freed, they've untied the knot of attachment to material things. They are free from material bondage, engaged in rendering devotional service unto the Lord. Now that Lord possesses transcendental qualities that attract everyone, even such liberated souls. Ordinary people are attracted by beautiful, good-looking princes and princesses and kings and battles and conspiracies and intrigue and suspense and cliffhangers, and all of that is contained within the Krishna literature. But over and above that, because Krishna is the central feature, the protagonist in both the great Mahabharata and Ramayana epics, everything is elevated to the level of transcendentalists, to the point that even those who are liberated from material attachments spend all of their time mad gacha mad pranapayam bodhyantas parashvaram katayantas chamamnyatam dashanti charaman, enlightening one another and conversing about the topics of Krishna. Now, we've talked extensively during the last few days about the monists, the impersonalists, otherwise called the Mayavadis. Maya means illusion. Maya literally means what is not. So a Mayavadi is someone who denies the reality of this material world. The phenomenal world in which we are situated, the Mayavadi would deny its reality. Why? What's the reason? Well, it's temporary. It's temporary, it's not real. It's like a dream. A dream seems real during the dream, but when you wake up, you realize that it was just a shimmer, a phantasmagoria. It had no real objective substance. So the Mayavadis argue that because this material world is temporary, it has no substance. Take the building in which we're living right now. It was fashioned from earth. After a period of manifestation, it will then again revert to earth. The Mayavadi would argue that the reality of this building is earth. It's not nails, planks, roof, floor, concrete blocks. It's not house. The reality of this is that for thousands of years it was earth, and for thousands of years it will be earth. So the reality of it is that it's earth. So similarly, the Mayavadis argue that because this material world is always in flux, it's always changing, it's never constant, it's like a dream. It seems real at the moment, but has no basis in reality. However, our school of thought, which is the dualists, the bhaktas, the devotees, argue that the fact that this material world is temporary does not falsify it. It makes it an inferior reality to the eternal, ever-manifested spiritual world. It's called the inferior or the external energy, whereas the spiritual energy, which is eternal and ever-manifest and self-effulgent, is the internal energy of the Lord. So in terms of stratification, yes, this material world is not as good, you might say, as the spiritual world. However, it does emanate from the self-same source. The material as well as the spiritual energies emanate from the Supreme Transcendental Lord, who is himself all spirit. So essentially and intrinsically, even this material energy is also spirit. It only becomes material when we misuse it under the name of family, friends, and country. So the fact that this world, this inferior energy of the Lord, is temporary does not invalidate it, does not falsify it. In fact, we can use the things of this world in the eternal service of the Lord. So because they have a function, while they're manifest, each and every aspect of this material world can be used in a different way for serving the Lord, so that way the world is not untrue. It's true in as much as you use it in the service of the Lord. So the Mayavadis take these stories from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana as just that, just stories, something made up. They deny that they're historical facts. They deny that they have any ultimate transcendental significance. They tell the stories. They take advantage of the stories because they know these stories have been popular since thousands and thousands of years. And if you want to get followers, if you want to build momentum amongst people in general, then you have to achieve validity. You have to appear to authenticate yourself by using these stories as references. However, the interpretation of the Mayavadis of these stories is that it is fictitious, it is made up, it is mythology, and their interpretations of the story, their commentaries on the stories are highly offensive because they have no idea of, nor do they have any faith in the Supreme Personality of God as being the highest manifestation of the Absolute Truth. I think that the highest manifestation of the Absolute Truth is ineffable, homogeneous, non-differentiated energy called Brahman. They overlook the many statements in the Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna says, Brahmano hi pratishtanam purnamavshivadham. The Brahman is my effulgence. The Brahman energy force field emanates from me. It has me as its origin. Mayavasham and Obinam Nityukta Tesham Yukta. He asserts to Arjuna repeatedly that to worship my personal feature is higher than worshiping my impersonal feature. To worship the personal feature, you get direct relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's relatively easily attained. To go after the impersonal feature of the Lord, to aspire to merge and become one with the Lord, requires a lot of discipline. It's incredibly difficult, and the end is not permanent. The end is inferior to the goal of bhakti, being accepted amongst the entourage of the Lord as a servant of a servant of a servant of a servant. But the problem with the Mayavadis is that everything for them becomes one. They cease to differentiate. They're such generalists. They generalize to the point that the living being is inflated, the position of a living being is inflated, and the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is deflated, and they're all lumped in together. This lack of discrimination, this lack of categorization is unscientific, kind of ironic, because such monists claim to be... Excuse me. I thought I had put my phone on silence before starting this. Apologize for that. The scientific process is to specify, is to categorize, and rigorously identify the qualities of each and every living thing. And so, from people who claim to be rooted in science and technology, this is very surprising. It's very sloppy, in fact, to generalize and lump in the Supreme Personality of Godhead with all of the ordinary living beings. And the consequence is, Prabhupada says, they unnecessarily poke their nose into Scripture and interpret it in a deceptive way in order to mislead the innocent public. I heard a story about one impersonalistic commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, jumped typically to the 10th canto, and he talked about Krishna being zero, Krishna being one, Krishna being non-differentiated and homogeneous. And his argument was that Krishna plays the flute. He asked his audience, you're all aware that Krishna is there, and you all see that wherever there's Krishna depicted, he always has a flute. So what's notable about the flute? The flute has holes. Holes are in the shape of a zero. So therefore, Krishna's personality has no particular significance because he plays the flute. The flute has holes, and the holes indicate that there's no special significance to Krishna's personality. Is it any wonder then that Prabhupada says of the Mayavadis, treating the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedic literatures as fictitious stories, they interpret them most mischievously. They mislead and do a great disservice to the innocent public. But not so for the pure devotees. Pure devotees of the Lord, they accept the narrations of the pastimes of the Lord, not as fictitious stories, not as mythology, but historical, objective, absolute truth. Moreover, such great authorities as Kapila Muni have established that bhakti stories, bhakti activities, bhakti relationships in devotional service are beyond the pale of mukti. They trump liberation. They surpass liberation. What to speak of sense gratification, economic development? There are 4 goals which are described as the goals of life for the majority of people. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Dharma means piety, religiosity. Artha means economic development. Kama means sense gratification. And mukti, it refers to the merging or the becoming one of the Lord. And these are the 4 topic matters about which the Vedas concern themselves. But the topic of bhakti, the topic of devotional service to the Lord, is called Panchama Purush Artha. That means that in material life, generally speaking, there are 4 arthas, there are 4 gains that one can get. One can get piety, one can get economic development, one can get sense gratification, and at the end, being fed up with the first 3, one can seek after liberation. The process of bhakti is described as the 5th goal of life. Panchama means 5th. Purusha refers to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Artha literally means profit. So the 5th goal after which one can aspire, which transcends even mukti, even the goal of the monist, is to engage in devotional service to the Lord. And for the most part, people engage in economic development, sense gratification. Ultimately, they have an idea of becoming one with the Lord when they become frustrated with trying to enjoy the material world. However, bhakti is transcendental to all of these activities. And that's why, right from the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the beautiful story, the absolute truth, we are told, if you're interested in Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, put the book down, walk away. Put it down, walk away. Because this book is not going to encourage you in any of those 4 areas. This book is about the Prema Purushartha, the Panchama Prema Purushartha. This is about the 5th ultimate goal of life, which is about devotional service to the Supreme Personality of God. So the second verse of the Bhagavatam, Dharma Projito Kaitavo Chamaracharam. All cheating religions, all engagement in so-called religious life for the self-centered purposes of righteousness, money, sense gratification, liberation, they're left behind. They're left at the door. You will not find any encouragement towards these activities. In fact, after compiling all the Vedas, Vyasadeva sat despondently, feeling unsatisfied. Something essential was missing. His guru came to him, chastised him for having even compiled the Vedas. He took him to task for having compiled the Vedic literatures themselves. The verse escapes me right now. What is that verse? Oh gosh, I know that verse like the back of my hand. But anyway, it'll come to me. He said, you have done a disservice to humanity in general by presenting these 4 goals under the guise of religiosity. Actually, religiosity, properly executed, has nothing to do with self-centered economic development, sense gratification, piety, or even liberation. Religion ultimately directs one, takes one to a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's not ultimately about religion, it's about a relationship. And the Bhagavatam is exclusively about the Lord and his unique, intimate relationships with his devotees. There are many instances, we talked yesterday about those who are in the monistic, impersonalistic conception of life, who, having intersected with devotional service, gave up their impersonalistic conception and elevated themselves to devotional service of the Lord. We talked about Vivamangala Thakur, who was derailed on his path of impersonalism by a naughty cowherd boy. We talked about the 4 Kumaras, who into their nostrils was wafted the scent of the tulsi mixed with the musk and sandalwood from the lotus feet of the Lord. They also gave up their impersonal conception. Sukadeva Goswami is another example. He was the son of Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva is the compiler of the Vedas. As we mentioned, Vyasadeva spent a good part of his literary career talking about mundane material achievements, mundane material goals. He conceived a son within the womb of his wife, and that son was affected and infected by the impersonalism with which the Vedas are tainted or tinged. So much situated in oneness was the child of Vyasadeva within the womb of the mother. Get this, that he saw no difference between being inside the womb and outside of the womb. What's the difference? Inside, outside, it's all one. The result was that he stayed within the womb of his mother for 16 years. So finally, after having completed the Vedas, after having had his heart-to-heart talk with Narada Muni, his spiritual master, and having been chastised by Narada Muni, and then compiled the Nigama Kapal Falagaditam Padam Shukam Mukaramita Devasamitam, compiled the ripened fruit of the Vedic literatures, the Srimad Bhagavatam, having crowned his literary achievements with the crest jewel of all, the beautiful story of the absolute truth, then that work, The father, Vyasadeva, the author, Vyasadeva, recited it to his son who was within the womb of his mother. Then, hearing from within the womb of his mother, the Srimad Bhagavatam from his father, Sukadeva Goswami, became transformed at heart. He gave up the monistic impersonal conception. He stopped minimizing the position of the Lord and inflating the position of the living entity. He decided to exit the womb, and immediately upon exiting the womb, an expanded part of him went off to join the assembly of sages on the banks of Yamuna and to preach the Srimad Bhagavatam, to repeat the Srimad Bhagavatam which he'd heard from his father to Maharaj Pariksit. And thus it comes down to us thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. Sukadeva Goswami had already reached the perfectional stage of monism. Can you imagine someone being more situated in monism than him? So situated in monism that he stayed packed up within the womb of his mother? How uncomfortable it is to be in that enclosed space, packed up with no room to breathe or stretch or exercise or even yawn. And yet so firmly situated was he in monism that he didn't even take the trouble to exit the womb until he heard the beautiful story, until he heard Hare Katamritam, topics about the Lord and his devotees. And those topics, even to him who was a liberated soul, were so pleasing, so beautiful, so far beyond anything with material shortcomings that he couldn't give it up. Even though he's a liberated soul, he became totally attached to hearing about the glories of the Lord. The topics about Krishna are not lacking any of the popular subject matters which people crave in mundane literatures. As I said, conspiracies, love affairs, intrigues, betrayals, war, it's all there. But because everything is centered on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is in fact attractive to all sorts of men. And over and above the average person, those who are liberated, you may begin hearing and chanting about Krishna as a conditioned soul, become gradually purified and gradually elevated. But when you reach that position beyond material affinity, the characteristic is that those, rather than giving up the Hari Katamritam, the nectar of hearing about Krishna, liberated souls typically intensify. Typically, they intensify it. Tatanvaham Krishna Kata Prakayatam Anugrahanam Srinvatam Tashare Miraparam Prayashivashyaskalitamanam. Narada Muni went from being the orphaned son of a single parent who didn't even know his father, a child at risk, you might say, to hanging around the sages just because he had nothing else to do. He had nowhere else to go. He had nothing else to eat, save it except taking the remnants of foodstuffs from the sages. But gradually through that association, and by hearing the subject matters which are traded back and forth between the realized souls, it is said that his whole consciousness became purified and transformed. And he became the great celebrated Narada Muni, the guru, the spiritual master of Vyasadeva, the one who pointed out the defect in the entirety of the Vedas. That personality, Sukadeva Goswami, became so addicted to hearing the pastimes of the Lord that he sat for 7 days and nights taking the questions of Maharaj Pariksit, giving elaborate answers, replete with stories from the interactions of the Lord and his devotees for 7 days. And during those 7 days of Kata, the last 7 days of Maharaj Parikit's life, neither Pariksit nor Sukadeva Goswami slept a wink, neither did they eat a morsel of food, neither did they even drink water. Name savo parayane brahmana shamane pibato chitapid Tadvakyapimanishan. Pariksit Maharaj said, wow, the time flies. 6.5 days ago, we started to hear about the glories of the Lord and so engrossed in these topics. So much pleasure. Normally, someone who's given a notice that they've got 7 days to die, everything turns to ashes. Family, wealth, prestige, bodily beauty. It all turns to ashes in your mouth once you know that you're going to die. There's no more enjoyment to be had from material fame, opulence, body beauty, physical good health, money in the bank, influence, leverage, prestige. All that for an ordinary person would have turned to ashes in his mouth. Who could enjoy during the last 7 days of their lives? And yet Maharaj Parikshit's enjoyment was of such a degree that he didn't even think about his impending death. He only asked that after I die, I may be able to continue hearing about the glories and pastimes of the Lord from such realized souls as Sukadeva Goswami. Imagine that. He said 6.5 days have passed so quickly and so ecstatically that I forgot to sleep. I forgot to eat. I forgot to drink. Now, how is that possible? We all know that if you don't drink anything for 3 days, you die. But Maharaj Parikshit was drinking pibanti te bhagatum atmanashanam katamritam shravana putushu. He was drinking. It wasn't that he wasn't drinking. It's just that he wasn't drinking water into the mouth, but he was drinking the elixir, the amrita, the nectar of the topics about Krishna through the ears, and his heart was satisfied. When you direct yourself to Krishna, when you address yourself to the prime goal of life, the fifth goal of awakening your love of God, and you apply yourself to that occupation, then everything else is taken care of. When you pursue the main thing, the secondary things are automatically covered. Savai pumsam parodamo yato bhakti haitukyapati yatmashi prasidati. It is said that the highest occupational duty for someone in the human form of life, savai pumsam parodamo, the highest duty, which is not surpassed by any other duty, yato bhaktira haikati, to engage in bhakti, loving devotional service of the Lord. That bhakti should be unmotivated. There shouldn't be the I in it. And it should be uninterrupted. It should be constant. It says, Yayatma Shuprashidati. And that alone will completely satisfy the soul. Maharaj Nimi also heard about the glorious pastimes of the Lord from an assembly of sages. And he was overheard to have told the sages, you are all great persons, absorbed in love of Godhead. Although you will speak about material problems, material miseries, you will counterpoint them with the remedy, the cure, the medicine of Krishna consciousness. So even though you're presenting Krishna consciousness as the medicine, as the antidote for birth, death, disease, and old age, please don't think that when the patient is cured of birth, death, disease, and old age, that we will then stop taking the medicine. It's an interesting point he makes. Isn't it a fact that in the normal course of things, taking medicine is not pleasant? Medicines are often bitter and unpleasant. Neem is a medicine. There are all kinds of turmeric is a medicine. Ginger is a medicine. All these are very, very good for your system, but they're extremely bitter to take. I put ginger in my juice every morning, and it definitely has a punch to it. It definitely has a heat to it. It has a bite to it. But these things are generally good. So in the interest of restoring ourselves to health, we will undergo the bitterness, the unpleasantness of taking medicine and herbs. But as soon as we get back to health, we can't wait to leave aside the ginger, to leave aside the turmeric, to leave aside the chilies, to leave aside the neem. However, the medicine of Krishna consciousness, Aneshio Shodi Maya Nachibara Lake, is such that when you drink it through the ears, it purifies the heart. It kills like an antibiotic. It kills all the anarthas, all the things which are contrary to Krishna consciousness within the heart. It restores the eternal living being back to a state of radiant, wholesome, spiritual love of God. It completely satisfies the living being. But once that medicine has done its job and one is no longer attracted, in fact, one's lip curls in disgust at material pursuits, one does not leave aside the medicine. Rather, the syndrome is that those cured persons, those Atmaramas, rather than leaving aside the medicine as something bitter or repugnant, they intensify their hearing and chanting of the glories of the Lord, confirming that at no point was initially the medicine might have been bitter because of our long-standing habits of ruminating in the material world. So initially, that which is like poison in the beginning, but nectar in the end, is pleasure in the mode of goodness. So when one takes time out of one's feverish pursuits of material activities to hear submissively and attentively from the right sources, at first it may be a little inconvenient, it may be a little difficult because one's habits have been otherwise for how many births we don't know. But as one becomes restored to wholesomeness, one tastes the Hari Katamrita for the nectar it is. And then tasting, and the very fact that your tasting is sweet means you're becoming restored to health. Prabhupada gives the example that when one is jaundiced, it's one characteristic of being jaundiced is that sugar tastes bitter. The last thing a person who has jaundice will take voluntarily is sugar. It tastes horrible. But sugar is the cure. Sugar cane is the cure for jaundice. So in order to bring that person back to health, sometimes 4 people have to hold him down and force the sugar cane into his mouth. But as the sugar cane acts and he becomes restored to health, then he starts to taste the sugar for what it is. Similarly, initially, to interrupt our pursuit, our sense gratification, to just sit down quietly and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It may be difficult, it may be awkward, it may be inconvenient, but soon we start tasting the topics about Krishna for the nectarine substance they are. And the interesting thing is that these sweet topics, Madaram, Nadaram, Madaram, Madaram, Nayanam, Madaram, Asaram, Madaram, Madiram, Madaram, Gamanam, Madaram, Madadayari, Patayarikaram, Madaram, Vachanam, Madaram, Chachinam, Madaram, Charitam, Madaram, Charitam, Madaram, Vasaram, Madaram, Gamanam, Madaram, Madadayari, Patayarikaram, Madaram, Vaino Madado, Reno Madadam, Penny Madam, Mari Madam, Netam Madam, Sakam Madam, Madadayari, Patayarikaram, Madam, Kitam Madam, Pitam Madam, Bhaktam Madam, Suptam Madam, Rupam Madam, Tirkam Madam, Madadayari, Patayarikaram, Madam, Karanam Madam, Taranam Madam, Madam, Mamitam Maradam, Samitam Maradam, Maradari Patayarakaram Maradam, Kunjam Maradam, Mala Marada, Yumana Maram, Vichim Maradam, Salam Maradam, Kamaram Maradam, Maradari Patayarakaram Maradam, Gopi Marada, Lila Marada, Yuktam Maradam, Maktam Maram, Distam Maram, System Maradam, Maradari Patayarakaram Maradam, Gopa Marada, Gova Maram, Yastir Maram, Vishir Maram, Daritam Maradam, Paritam Maradam, Maradari Patayarakaram Maradam. That was the 8 verses of the Madhurashtam, composed by Vallabhacharya about 6 centuries ago. And the word Madhur means sweet. It says Krishna's lips are sweet, his eyes are sweet, his flute playing is sweet, his friendship is sweet, his dancing is sweet, his walking is sweet, the things that surround him are sweet. His Yamuna river is sweet, her rippling waves are sweet, her lotus flowers are sweet, her waters are sweet, his gopis, his cowherd girlfriends are sweet, his cowherd boyfriends are sweet, his cows are sweet, his adventures are sweet, his amorous pastimes are sweet. Everything is completely sweet about the Lord of sweetness. How can one who has been cured of material affinity give up the sweetness of talking about the names of Krishna, Just the opposite. Tunde, tundavini, ratam, vitanata, tandaval, labde, karna, kroda, kadabeni, katayate, karnashpiram. Rupa Goswami said that now my Krishna consciousness has fully awakened. Now I deem that 2 ears and 1 tongue is totally inadequate for properly tasting and hearing the nectar of Krishna's pastimes. I think that the creator, I think that the person who created these bodies must be sort of unintelligent, because the potential for nectar is so great by chanting and hearing that if he had been truly dialed in, he would have given us hundreds of miles and thousands of ears to begin to taste the nectar which is churned by Krishna Rama. Even a neophyte devotee, even in the formative stages of devotional service, one develops attachment. And from that attachment, one develops adherence. And from adherence, one further comes up to the stage of following. And from the stage of following and befriending the Lord, one comes to the stage of wanting to take care of the Lord. The waxing of one's love comes to the point that one sees oneself as superior to the Lord, that one wants to look out and look after the Lord as if the Lord couldn't look after himself, like Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj. Nanda Kimakarobaram Sreme Yashoda Mahabaro Papa Yashim Taramani. It says, look at this Nanda Maharaj. His devotional service started with passivity, and then he became more active, and he became a servitor. As a servitor, he became more attached. His relationship and his love for Krishna thickened. Just like from sugar water, you get molasses. And from molasses, finally, you get rock candy. Finally, he came up to the stage of feeling himself as a friend to the Lord. And then further progressing, this Nanda Maharaj wants to take care of the Lord as his father. And respecting that intensity of love on the part of Nanda Maharaj, Krishna treats him. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of God, plays the role of Nanda Maharaj's son. It says little baby Krishna, who's barely able to walk, takes the slippers of Nanda Maharaj on his head, and he brings his daddy's slippers. Nanda Kimakaro Shema Yashoda Mahababo Papu Yashistanamari says he sucks the breast milk. The Supreme Personality of Godhead sucks the breast milk of Yashoda Mai. He so much respects the desire on the part of Yashoda to render service in a parental mood of affection to the Lord that he totally reciprocates with her, up to the point of sucking her breast. Now, why would God need sustenance? Why would God need anybody's breast milk to maintain himself? He's fully satisfied and self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything. He's the chief of all the Atmaramas. He derives unlimited pleasure from his own self-same existence. He doesn't need anything external to himself. In fact, everything external is nothing but an expansion of his energies. He's fully satisfied. He's always smiling. He's always happy. He's so happy that he makes others happy. You come into the temple, you take one look at Krishna, all your troubles go away. Why he's sucking milk from the breast of Mother Yashoda? Because he wants her to be fulfilled. He created her to love him. He created all of us to love him. There's nothing he likes better than the awakening of our desire to love him and our getting back with the program that we left so long ago. And he'll do anything. He'll move heaven and earth in order to encourage us to resume our long-lost devotional service to him. And so he encourages Mother Yashoda by playing the part of her child and pretending that he needs her breast milk in order to stay healthy and happy. It's a well-known fact that after the baby is born, he needs the mother's milk because in that mother's milk is a lot of cholesterol. We come into this material world, we've got an immune system which is undeveloped. We're tiny, we're weak, we haven't got our defenses, they have not yet kicked in. So by God's arrangement, the breast milk of the mother is full of immunities. It's full of antibiotics. It's full of elements that are going to fortify and protect that child who cannot protect himself. So why would Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, need the colostrum from the breast milk of his mother? He does it in order to reciprocate in love and devotion. And when devotees meditate upon this feature of the Lord, is subordinate himself to his devotees, they get goosebumps. Their hair stands on ends. And it is a catalyst for our own attraction to the Lord. It makes our own attraction so strong that the more we advance in devotional service, we never think of trading in any devotional assets in exchange for material enjoyment, mystic powers, or liberations. Not that those opportunities won't present themselves, but devotees have no interest in trading in love of God for any temporary material aspect or enjoyment. It is the nature of the living being to be attracted to Krishna. We ourselves are transcendental to the mundane world. Our qualities originally come from Krishna. They're eternal, they're spiritual. We innately and originally are full of eternality, bliss, and knowledge. We are possessed of borrowed plumes from the Lord. He is Aishwarya Shabhagasha Viryasha Jnanam Vairagasha Shama Bhagamayam. Krishna is replete with all qualities of wealth, fame, strength, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. And as his shining parts and particles, we also reflect those qualities from the Lord. It's like the stars in the sky do not create their own light, but they're visible, they're shining up there. Twinkle, twinkle, little star up in the sky. They're twinkling because of the reflected light from the sun and the moon. Similarly, whatever qualities we have, they're reflected qualities from the features of the Lord. And so when we connect with him in loving devotional service, there's no going back. There was no going back for the Kumaras. There was no going back for Sukadeva Goswami. There was no going back for Rantidev. There was no going back for Maharaj Nimi. There was no going back for Rukmini. There was no going back for the cowherd damsels of Braja. There's no going back for the gopis. It's the place going which no one ever returns. Many, 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 many Mayavadis and impersonalists have graduated to the level of devotional service, but never ever has anyone engaged in devotional service ever dropped back down to the point of monism, of aspiring to become one with the Lord. That is Kaivalyam Nadake, a hellish proposition. Why would anyone become one in the Lord when, as a separate, distinct, unique individual created by the Lord to love the Lord and be loved by the Lord, why would you want to eradicate that? Why would you want to take that off the board and erase it when you can step right into the middle of eternal, blissful, fully knowledgeable devotional service to the Lord? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That concludes our time. We're right on the dot here, 8:15. Not that we have to go for 45 minutes. Half an hour would be perfectly adequate, but it always seems that it's all we can do to stop after 45 minutes. Just like the liberated souls don't stop hearing chanting about Krishna, they intensify. So after 45 minutes of sharing Krishna consciousness with you, I'm pretty fired up, but I recognize that you've taken time out of a busy schedule to be here, and I can't take advantage of that. So thanks to all of you for joining. Do you have any words for us here, Rob, today?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. It's just don't commit spiritual suicide by seeking after the
Let's see.
impersonal.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Can you repeat that? I had my volume at 0.
Yes, I was just saying don't commit spiritual suicide by pursuing the impersonal feature, and instead, aspire for bhakti yoga. Loving devotional service is the greatest and most pleasurable form.
Yeah, I mean, impersonalism is a good stepping stone. Many people became devotees through impersonalism. You can arrive at impersonalism through your own efforts, basically, and through your own analysis of this material world. But having reached that point, then there's two ways to go. There's staying open and eventually getting the benefit of the association of pure devotees and continuing to move ahead and upwards. Or one can, out of ego, think that one has achieved everything that's to be achieved, and then stop right there and dig one's heels in and resist any further input or any further effort on the part of the Lord to exhibit his mercy to you. And so generally when you speak of impersonalists, we're talking about the latter category. But there are also many examples of people who were impersonalists on the way to Krishna. So it's not necessarily by definition committing spiritual suicide, but those who are dyed in the wool impersonalists become serious offenders. The title of this talk is The Mischievous Mayavadis. Certainly not a complimentary adjective that Prabhupada applied to the monists in general. So thanks very much for that. Jean, thank you for joining us. Natasha, Hare Krishna, Brent, Govinda Dave. We were just on our Tuesday night conference call. It seems like just a few minutes ago, but that was last night. A lot of things to be discussed. Janatarani, good morning. Suprabhatam, Vaibhavi. Britta, good morning to you from Ogden. Jay, Britta says, I love hearing these wise words. This world is neither good nor bad, but how we use it. Material energy is inferior energy, but it's not invalid, it's not false. If you use it in the service of the Lord, then what we call material energy, what we call inferior energy, actually is spiritual. It's good. Look at the temple. That's made of inferior energy, but the inferior energy was organized in such a way that many people become Krishna conscious. So the inferior energy is not false, provided you use it in the service of the Lord from whom it comes. The whole process of devotional service, the whole thrust of missionary work is reclaiming God's resources in the service of the Lord. So the material energy, in as much as it can be used, molded, and fashioned to promote and enhance Krishna consciousness in people in general, we have no problem with the material. We have no antipathy towards the material energy. Material energy is neutral, and we only see matter as an opportunity to up our game, to increase our devotional service to the Lord. We have a more extensive comment by Britta here, who's highly intelligent. And I love her comment. She says, it seems like impersonalism is rife in ideas like communism. Looks good on paper, but never works in real life because the person cannot be subsumed by the impersonal idea that there's no individual. Yeah, the problem with impersonalism is that you're a person. So however attractive you may think impersonalism is, you can't negate, you can't change the fact that God made you as a person. So you're definitely swimming upstream there. Furthermore, Britta says, I personally made the mistake of falling into impersonalism as it's super trendy in the so-called yoga world. But it's never been a case of if I fall down on that. But it's never been a case of if I fall down on that path, but when. Continuing on, religiosity has nothing to do with self-centered gratification. It's about a relationship. She used to teach in a school where childs were at risk, and she left that because I think a child at risk hauled off at her. So she says, I wish all of my child at risk students could sit with the sages. If it worked for Narada Muni, it could work for them. Govinda Dev says, time flies in Krishna Katha. The last 45 minutes went like nothing. John Malik, good morning, John. Britta says she took her bitter medicine this morning, her ginger and turmeric. John Malik says, material life is killing our spiritual life nowadays. Thanks for the explanation. It's never long enough. Well, thank you so much. I'll let you guys get to what it is that you have to do today, but with deep appreciation from my side for joining me. It's nice not to be here all by myself in the morning, but to have people joining on Facebook Live, to have Rob on Zoom, and especially to have your interactive comments. Bless you. Have a blessed Krishna conscious day. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare.